Murphy.
Good evening, everybody joining us in St. Michael's Theatre, and to everybody who's joining us remotely as well. We've had a great day. It's great to be back with the summer school back in St. Michael's Theatre. We've had a lovely evening, a great discussion between Mick Mulvaney and Brendan Boyle, and listening to Luke O'Neill earlier on. For me, the highlight of the summer school is going to be our next session. I'm delighted to be asked to introduce the Kennedy Summer School's annual Edward M. Kennedy interview. And for the interview this year, we wanted to honour Tommie Gorman for his extraordinary 40-year career of public service broadcasting, of journalism, and for his wider contribution to peace and to Irish society. Over the course of a very, very distinguished career, Tommie has interviewed thousands of people and reported on tens of thousands of events. And when we were thinking about who would interview Tommie, we decided we would turn the tables on him in some way. During Tommie's career, possibly the most reported man in Ireland and probably the most interviewed person in Ireland was Bertie Ahearn. So we're absolutely delighted that Bertie has agreed to conduct the interview, and I'd ask you to put your hands together for Bertie Ahearn and Tommie Gorman.
Tommie. Hi. Well, thanks very much, Brian, and congratulations to Brian and all the directors for, in all the circumstances, being able to have the summer school again, and with all the restrictions and regulations and everything else, to be able to put on a 3-day event. So well done to them, and I'm delighted to be invited to be part of it. I used to be here as Taoiseach, and then I was here talking about Brexit, so it's great to be doing something that's a bit easier than all of that, but a bit more pleasurable as well. Before we start talking about what this is all about, is honouring the life and times of somebody I had admired and obviously worked with in that extraordinary way that we have of journalism and broadcaster and politician that we do in Ireland, to be here with Tommie. But before we do that, Tommie, I just wanted to give our condolences to the Hume family, somebody that you and I know very well and spoke to so many times and admired and appreciated. So we from New Ross here, we send our sympathies to the entire Hume family, to somebody that was a really great friend of ours and great person, Pat Hume.
Yeah, when I think of Pat Hume, the first image that comes to mind of her is that wedding photograph of herself and John. They were like film stars, the two of them. She was just a beautiful person. And I think if one act defined them as a couple, and it was as a couple they did it, it was when John shared the Nobel Prize, he gave the money to charity. And of course, Pat was the one who knew the consequences of that, bringing up a large family. And that's the kind of people they were. They were wonderful.
Thanks very much, Tommie. We think and say a prayer for them. Tommie, I want to try, we have under an hour, and you've been around for 65 years. I'm not...
and they'll switch off after 5 or 10 minutes too.
Yeah. and I've been just slightly longer. So we have covered a lot of ground, but you've covered a heck of a lot of ground in what's been an extraordinary and wonderful career. And I want to try and do some justice to it, but touching on some areas, and then let's try and get into some more of them in maybe a bit more detail. But every time I ever saw you, whether it was Brussels or whether it was anywhere in Europe, or through 20 years at the North, where we were working on so many tense things, I could only always think of Sligo. And I know your whole heart wherever you were, I think was always in Sligo. You were a fanatic about so many things, Sligo. So I'd like to touch on that early part of your career before you took off into RT days and before you became Northwestern correspondent. And if you just give us a bit of flavour, I know that your father bought the house nearest to Markovich Park so that you wouldn't have to pay in and be able to watch the matches in Markovich Park. And I was wondering, was that the reason you turned against Gaelic and you started following Sligo Rovers? But on the serious note, I was always wondering, I know it's the garrison town, and I know like Longford and Athlone and everywhere else that Sligo, but you have been probably, not arguably, but the best Sligo Rovers supporter. But that early years of growing up and being so much part of Sligo, and whenever I used to ask anybody about Sligo, I think you were Kentstown, was it, or that you were originally from? But I used to go to Riverstown, Noon's pub for Ballygowan. But you were in a different part of Sligo. But maybe tell us just about that.
My father wasn't mean. My father was a very generous man, but it was the boy in him that he bought the last of what were 6 a row of 12 semi-detached houses. But I didn't realise it until much later on in my life. What attracted him to the place was we literally had a corporate box out our front window. You could see the Markovich from there. And there were 4 of us. I was the third of 4. My grandmother came to live with us when I was born, and she lived to her 101st year. And she was really part of our family as well. We were rich at one stage. Daddy was a cattle dealer. He lost all his money. He was too trusting, if you can ever be that. He got TB. He drank for a while and then became a pioneer. And then suddenly we were poor. So my mother and my father and my grandmother just did everything that was necessary to rear us and give us the best chances we could get. Mammy went to work in a factory at one stage when Daddy was sick. He did little jobs here and there that he could get. His last job was as a petrol pump attendant. I'm very proud of the fact that he stayed working even with ill health all his life. And if there was money needed for a school tour or for an extra stretch at school, Granny's pension came in to sort of fill that place. So we needed for nothing. And my wife grew up with the same kind of love in her life. Her father died when she was 10 months. He was a GP in Cork. Her mother had 4 girls, like steps of stairs. Ciara was the baby. She was a nurse. She went back to work. She ended up managing a centre in the voluntary sector. And so the pair of us, I suppose what we have in common is we just grew up in homes, and there were so many homes like that in the Ireland of the 60s and the 70s where parents didn't go on holidays, where to try and get the kids that pushed through second level education, which was free, and to try to get them on to third level, parents had to do everything. So that's my background.
Well, they certainly did a good job and a proud achievement to get you all through second level education and get moving on. And then you finish up school and you had the flair for journalism. You were in Rathmines. And then you went working for that great Mayo publication, the Western People.
Western Journal. It was a new paper started.
John Healy was.
Yeah, John Healy and Jim Maguire. In a way, it was a bit of a grudge match that I didn't know about. And it was the perfect training because it was seat of the pants stuff, poorly financed, in recessionary times, and it really needed. Healy used to say things like, "Watch the clock in the morning, forget about it at night," and you know he had all sorts of advice that he'd offer you. He was the original backbencher. He was a great teacher, and he just instilled in me a love of the craft. Healy died far too young. He was 61. He died in January, I think it was 1991. Far, far too young. But he was a great role model.
Yeah, I believe he's a great. I remember when I was a young guy, he had the article in the Times.
Backbencher.
Backbencher.
Yeah, people will remember
And
that. He was the
my-
first political,
Yeah.
commentator, really.
I loved
of a
reading
sort.
that article every morning. You felt you were inside of the bubble of Leinster House at the time, which is different definition of the bubble now. But he was really the king of that. So working with them, obviously, you were following the stories of the West, and I know there were some tough times in that, and then you went on into RTE, and you created a job for yourself as Northwestern correspondent. I don't know how you convinced the board to create that job, because you were the first person that was in it, and it's the job you wanted most. So you succeeded in doing that.
I was really lucky because I had no experience in broadcasting. I was succeeding a man called Sean O'Haley, a Derry man who went to work as the Agarhor Gaelgas in the Irish press. For me, they took a huge risk with me in RTE because I didn't have that broadcasting background. I didn't have training in Dublin. So I was just very, very conscious that I was on trial. So the only way you could maybe respond to that was to work as hard as you could.
Yeah. Well, there's so many stories that you worked on, and we can't go through them all, but there's one that stuck in my mind at that time, and it was when Garda John Morley and Henry Byrne both were murdered. That was a huge story at the time, as it still is when a member of the Garda Síochána is killed. Maybe you just recall a bit of that. I mean, there's an audience that forgets the brutality of that, and I know that while you didn't maybe directly know them that well, certainly people that you were working with knew them very, very well.
Yeah, John Morley and Henry Byrne, they were Gardaí who were stationed near Ballahadreen. It was actually a few months before I joined RTE that they were killed at a place called Shannon's Cross after a bank robbery. And when I was in the paper, we'd have people who do the local notes in the different villages. And our local notesman in those days was John O'Mahony, who was a young school teacher. John O'Mahony, who went on to become John O'Mahony, the trainer of Mayo, John O'Mahony TD. And it was John who rang on the day of that murder. I remember the headline we put on the 72-point headline on the front page of the paper. It was "Slaughter at Shannon's Cross." And when you say you don't really know the people, like we all grew up knowing John Morley, the footballer, and my maths teacher in Summerhill was a man called Tom Byrne, and he was a brother of Henry Byrne. So it's a very Irish thing, isn't it, Bertie, that we can nearly always get a handle on somebody in this country when something happens. It's something about the size of Ireland, and I think it's part of the interconnectedness that
John
defines
Morley
us.
was the great centre half back with me.
He was, yeah.
And that was a huge tragedy, which I think you were the one who covered that story for a long time in the papers. Just on the lighter side of it, since you mentioned John O'Mahony, I didn't know this, but you were actually advising and doing a whole lot of work for Mayo and for John O'Mahony when he was with Mayo. I mean, would you accept part of the responsibility for the fact that Mayo haven't won an All-Ireland in 70 years?
John O'Mahony he's a first-class person. He's the man I heard say about football teams, 5-star treatment for a 5-star performance. So he'd get the best of dieting advice. Eddie O'Sullivan, a young Eddie O'Sullivan, was providing the advice about fitness training. He had a guy, Bill, who was a psychologist based in Galway. I think he was working with digital at the time, and he was part of John's backroom team, and I used to help him with video analysis, and we used to do these motivational videos, say, So say that the night before a game, you'd maybe show pictures of past games, and you'd slow-mo the music and you'd pick a track. And it was just to try and give people that connection with their audience. I did the same with him when he was with Leitrim. And then he won 2 All-Irelands with Galway. But I remember 1989 standing close to him out on the pitch after Cork had beaten them in the All-Ireland. And it's on my wish list to see Mayo win an All-Ireland. I think 31 counties in Ireland, even Dublin, even you, would be happy.
Yeah.
For
the first time in a decade, I'll be shouting for them.
Yeah. But I think there'd just be a nice finessing to the year that's been in it if Mayo were to win an All-Ireland.
I was wondering, their advisors down the years, would it not have been easier for that team back in '51 in Wexford to pay a bit of respect to the funeral? It would have been easier, you know.
Well, we won't go into respect and how people behave at funerals or on football fields or stuff like that, Bertie. You know,
in fairness, it was the following morning. They were drinking all night, so we won't go into it.
You're still bruised by what happened in the semi-final, and I can understand how, as a dub, you'd be in that situation.
Oh, if only Stephen Cluxon was there. But anyway, Sligo Rovers, Tommie, you've done a huge amount for Sligo Rovers in every way, and we won't have time to go through all of that. But one of the things I've always admired about Sligo Rovers is unlike maybe a lot of League of Ireland clubs. I don't mean this disrespectful to any of them. You've always managed to have, very high quality people on the board, driving the club, fundraising for the club, bringing over professionals, semi-professionals. Like Sligo's a great place, but that hasn't been easy down through the years. And producing David Pugh and Dixie Dean and great. But how is that kind of spirit?
Sligo Rovers are show business. We're in a theatre. We all need it. At different stages in our lives, we all need some bit of magic. You need some bit of romance. And Sligo Rovers are that for us. People always stretched. And you're right, it is a garrison town. So we have that interest in soccer. And Sligo Rovers, for us, really were the dreams factory, where you could go and you'd see foreigners, or you could see a fight, or you could see a ref in trouble. But you always got theatre in Sligo. Hard luck stories all the time. I'm wearing a red tie tonight. I'm conscious that as we speak, Sligo Rovers are playing in Drogheda. We haven't won in 7 games. Awful run. I'm hoping that, we'll qualify for Europe this year, which defines a soccer team. But just like everybody has just the one hometown, well, the magic throughout my life as a Sligo person has been provided by Sligo Rovers. The ground is owned by the people, held in trust by the people, can never be sold. And it's just a lovely feeling when you're driving on a dark night towards Sligo, when there's a League of Ireland match on, and you can see the floodlights from miles around. That's the effect they have on us. They just provide us with that extra lift.
I know there were lots of games, but I think... am I right, Tommy? The '83 Cup final was one of your special special nights.
Yeah, that was against Bohemians. A young guy from the town, Harry McLaughlin, got the winning goal in the mud. And I remember I had met Ciara just a few months beforehand, and I knew this is the year to get married if she'll marry me. All the lights were green, and that's the way it was. We were married in October that year, '83. So, there was serendipity attached. It was a signal. It was a sign.
Yeah, well, I hope you win tonight anyway. Don't it'd be terrible.
Thank you.
See how that all works. I suppose, Rathmines, and being in Dublin and then Northwestern correspondent. Moving to RTE must have been a huge move. It couldn't have been easy. You you were embedded in Sligo, your family were Sligo, your friends were Sligo, you know, and then
No,
all of
but,
a sudden...
it was completely different to that. It was like a dream come true. You know, from, you know, local newspapers to be trusted as Northwestern correspondent by RTE. I never worked at headquarters. And then, 1989, I'd worked for 9 years in the Northwest. Then they sent me to Brussels. Like, that was going to playing from a local team to playing for a full-time team. And then I was playing international football. I was getting a cap. So, like, that was, like, pinched me time as well. Like, you're just so conscious of the trust, the responsibility, the opportunity, but also the good fortune. Yeah. And, you know, you're never far from your roots and the people, your parents and whatever. And it was an opportunity to try to give something back to them as well.
But it was such an exciting period because Delors was there, who, in my view, has been by far the best president of the commission. Everything was excitement. He was doing the cohesion funds, the structure funds, all of that. Then you were into 1990, or the end of 99, the last quarter of 89, where you had all of the changes in Eastern Europe, the excitement of that, and then into the Irish presidency. So you certainly were into it in a great period.
Well, I suppose I also began to see how the bits of the jigsaw work. Like, I was out for a walk. I've never been in New Ross before, but I was out for a walk this morning, and I was just looking at the prosperity of the countryside and the farms and the houses, and I trace, say, the emergence of this modern Ireland that's still evolving in a very, very positive way. I trace so much of that to our membership of the European Union. I could see it in my own community. I could see it with farmers. Like, it started, say, with farmers with a common agricultural policy, and suddenly farmers just weren't depending on what the market would give them. They were given, you know, guaranteed prices, and you could see the bit of prosperity, and it was a bottoms-up thing. And then you could see, you know, people who were going to the ITs, you know, they were getting grants to go there, and the spread of third-level education. And then you could see the quality of the roads network improving. And then, of course, all the social changes that came. And then the way we got out of this angry relationship, this difficult relationship we had with our nearest neighbour, by being part of a bigger club. And that allowed us to redefine our relationship with Britain as well. So I associate my years in Europe with being able to see those bits and pieces in action. I also saw, like, I knew you well as a minister in those places. And I saw our country take its place, fight for its place, pull its weight, participate. Remember the time the currency was devalued?
93.
Yeah, you didn't give me a tip-off in advance about that. I was raging with you.
Well,
you know, I was at home and the story came through, and I thought, Jesus, he'll give me a nod here that there's something coming.
The reason for that, Tommie, was that the 100 million that you had in the bank would have gained 10%, and I couldn't tell you, but sorry about that.
But you remember those, like, they were
exciting.
They were really, really immense times. And I remember in those days, like, there were 4 countries in the structural funds. We used to call it the Paupers Club.
Yeah.
Greece, Spain, Portugal and Ireland. And we were getting at one stage €5 or pounds for every one we put into the kitty. It was an amazing arrangement. But Ireland in those years had the record of absorbing the money better than the other 3 member states. Like, the value that was got for the investment when the Europeans did, you know, independent analysis of how that was being absorbed. Ireland was very, very good at using those funds. And I think that the changes, the positive changes that took place in Ireland, an awful lot of them can be traced back to European Union membership in those years.
Yeah. Well, when you went out there, the population of the Republic would have been just short of 3 million. This week we went past 5 million. Just on a lighter note, being in Europe allowed you to move around. You had all the days in Eastern Europe, but you also had the days back here during that great presidency. I remember the presidency was to be called the Green Presidency in 1990, but that quickly changed when coal and changed the whole agenda. But your role wasn't just covering the story of that successful presidency. You also organised the leaders to see the football match at the penalty shootout in 1990.
That was it's a funny story when I think about it now. I remember Charlie Hoy was Taoiseach at the time, and he was inside giving a briefing to foreign media. He had the Financial Times and some of the Germans and maybe somebody from French papers. And it was all very serious stuff, because remember, a lot of the changes in relation to German reunification took place on Ireland's watch.
Yes.
Part of our ongoing positive relationship with Germany. But Charlie Hoy was in there briefing anyway, but the penalties were taking place, and I went into the room and he said, "What's wrong with you?" And he called me Gorman. He didn't say Tommie Gorman or whatever. So I said, "Turn on the television, Taoiseach." So he switched on the television, and it was Packy Bonner saving the penalty. And quick as a flash, he's changed personality completely. And he ran out into the courtyard in Dublin Castle, and I can still see those images of him jumping up and down. And of course, Ireland was in party time after that. It's a great time. And for the Europeans, for all those journalists to be over in Ireland in those days, and for them to see the country celebrating, like, those images were more positive than anything, pictures of European leaders could have done for us.
Yeah. And I suppose moving on from that, that period, it was Maastricht, it was the collapse of the ERM. Like, there were huge stories coming out of Europe almost every year, and then you had the end of the Tory era, Tony Blair coming into power. You had the changes in France, and you had Andreotti and all these guys. I mean, you actually were there to cover that transition from that old guard that had been there in the 70s and 80s right into a whole new crew.
Yeah, the most dramatic thing that took place, and it was, the persuasive power of the way Europe was working. The Cold War was won peacefully. I remember driving with John Downing from the Irish Independent down through Germany and across into the Czech Republic. I remember the border guards as we entered the Czech Republic. It was Czechoslovakia in those days. And we were there when communism in Czechoslovakia completely collapsed. And 5 days later, we came back along the same road, and the border guards were gone. And I suppose the phase of European change that, we're seeing every other day in Ireland now, the increase in the population, the Eastern Europeans who are now such an important part of our community. In some ways, Europe went from being a delicatessen to a supermarket because it became large in relative terms, became more complex. But a lot of and it was great to see the power of democracy and how it worked. And a lot of, say, the changes that are taking place in our society now, you can trace them back to the collapse of Eastern Europe. And, like, football is great for reflecting change. When I was watching the match the other night, and you talked about the population going up to 5 million, and I saw this generation of new, young, brave Irish footballers. You see the same in, the teams that we've sent to the Paralympics, to the Olympics. You can see how our country is being energized with these, people who are making their homes here. And it makes you so enthusiastic and excited about the possibilities of this country now.
Well, certainly it's been a great period for sport, and even though we lost the other night, I think it was a good sign of the future. Talking about football, Tommie, you managed in that period when you were in Brussels to do better than I did. You got to most of the important matches, even though I think you were implied to cover politics and guys like me. You never seemed to miss any of the big games. I mean,
Well, you know yourself, news is really what people are interested in. So by the very definition, if there are Irish players, say on a team like Manchester United in the Champions League final, it's an Irish story in a way. And the same way, if the international team is playing, if the rugby team is playing, it was just great. It was a dream job. to be able to go to those.
99, a good day for United.
Yeah, wonderful day.
Maybe when we're dealing with that, we're just jumping the period, but I can't do this interview without talking about Saipan for a few moments. And I know you tried your best, and we all failed, but
which side were you on? Were you on Keane's side or?
Well, I remember being in that lovely hotel in Abbey Street, Wynn's Hotel in Abbey Street, and I was going to a retirement do of a guy that was working with CIE, and I ended up having to get in the middle of these pensioners who were going to clock each other over which side they were on, and it was a real division in the country.
But which side were you on yourself? Were you
well, I was a Man United supporter, so
that means you think Keane was right.
You could see no wrong with Rye, but what, without getting into too much, I mean, you did your best, and I know Michael Kennedy is memorial tomorrow. I think, Tommie. And he was a great guy, and probably one of the early agents of football. But just looking back now from this long distance of 20 years almost, what do you think really stopped it succeeding?
Well, Keane is a gladiator. He was almost peerless as a footballer. And he had really, really exacting standards. And he demanded them off other people because he demanded them off himself as well. And he was at a stage in his career where he knew there wasn't going to be a better chance. He could see the potential of that Irish team. He had a short fuse. It's what made him such a good footballer. And I think that when he was confronted by the possibility of missing an opportunity and being mediocre or haphazard, when you take into account what was going on at that level in the FAI then and continued for years, I think he snapped. I think it's a tragedy that he didn't play in that World Cup. I think we would have done a lot better. God knows how far we'd have progressed. But I was watching him the other night. It was a very good interview with him with Gary Neville.
Yes.
And I don't know, will he ever make a successful football manager? I don't know whether somebody with his standards and his track record, whether he can pass on that magic to others. And I'd also wonder whether he has the patience to put up with the way modern players are allowed to behave.
And the money that they receive. But anyway,
and the agent system.
Yeah, the agent system, which Alex Ferguson was probably the one who's been most outspoken about that. One of the things, I mean, we could, I think, talk all night about all the documentaries that you did. I mean, there's been so many that you did, Mullaghmore and the Queen's visit. That I was involved in the early stages of trying to get that to happen. Michaela Hart, which I found was, I thought that was definitely a tearjerker. If I recall right, you spent several weeks out there covering that whole story, which was a story that, well, not a story, a murder that gripped the entire country, but not only our country. I think it gripped a lot of the world. And you spoke to John about that, but just covering that whole thing. I mean, I suppose for people that don't recall it, I think the thing that always stuck in my head, that Michaela was married, I think, was it on the end of December, and on the 16th, in the same church on the 16th of January, they had her funeral. if there was ever a heartbreaking story. But you just didn't, you did the documentary, but you just didn't do a documentary that went on for a few days. I mean, you were covering, am I right, 6, 7, 8 weeks?
Yeah, I covered the trial and I made a program about that. But I also made a program about loss and grief. You could never imagine anything worse than what happened to Michaela McAreevy's husband, her parents, her siblings. It was unthinkable, just the obscenity of it. And I remember having the trust of Mickey Hart and his family, and John McAreevy and his uncle, and Michaela's friends, and I just found that just an extremely moving experience, and it's one of the regrets of my life, that subsequently there was a breakdown in the relationship with Mickey Hart and RTE, and it saddens me, and I have nothing but respect and sympathy for them as people.
But I think it was a great documentary of just a tragedy. I suppose, I mean, let's move on again, because time, we're up to the north. We're into a few years after the Good Friday Agreement, and though you've been following that, because it's often forgotten that Brussels was a huge part of helping the Good Friday Agreement. Sometimes people talk about America and the UK and the rest of us who were involved, but actually Brussels and the aid and the cross-border programs.
It's bigger than that, Bertie. I think if you look at what has happened in recent times, like you go back to Ireland 1914, the First World War, things were stirring on the island. There was a move towards independence, move towards insurrection that was postponed. We had the 1916 Rising, the war ended 1918, and there was a huge period of change. And I think that Brexit is having the same impact in terms of stirring the pot, destabilizing the relationships. I don't think the people who were involved, say, in elements of Brexit understood that the European dimension, where it was like such an essential part of the architecture of the Good Friday Agreement, that we were all in Europe together, the English, ourselves, the Europeans, the North, the South. You could cross borders easily. You didn't have the nonsense you have now in borders down the Irish Sea or borders on the island of Ireland. You could move freely through Europe, like, even the way the British are having to implement COVID at the moment in terms of continental Europe. It's different. We've got this arrangement with Ireland and Britain that's different. But say Britain and the mainland European countries is so different. And I think that what Brexit has done is it has destabilized, it has changed the way people see things. And that change is going to continue. Like, it's really interesting. The phase we're in at the moment, you were looking at assembly elections in Northern Ireland next May. You're looking at the growth of Sinn Féin since the peace process in which you, as a Fianna Fáil leader, were critically involved. You're looking at Sinn Féin as way ahead of Labour. Its next target is the family you come from, as Fianna Fáil. It's that old Civil War battle being revisited. I'm writing about this in the Currency at the weekend. And already there's a very real possibility shaping up of Sinn Féin becoming the largest party in Northern Ireland. What's that going to do to the Good Friday Agreement arrangements? And then if Sinn Féin is the largest party in Northern Ireland from next May, the next target for them, and you look at the growth of seats that the party has gone through, the obvious next question is, what's going to happen down here in the next general election? Will this government run the full term? If Sinn Féin continues its growth in seats, can a case be made to have a government without Sinn Féin in it? And if Sinn Féin gets into power, how is it going to behave? So Brexit has had a role in this new dynamic that's underway. I also think, and this is something that, isn't maybe fully discussed, by taking out such a big unit out of the European Union, 60 million people, it has actually destabilized in some way, or has the potential to destabilize the way that European Union operated. You have Angela Merkel going, elections this month in Germany, impossible to replace in the short term. You have French elections next year. Will Macron survive? So again, you have this interesting, it's a fascinating time to be alive, to be watching these things. But you have this period of uncertainty in so many areas of politics. Then you pitch in the last element of Brexit. You pitch in what's happening across the water. I don't see Boris Johnson as being a full two-term Prime Minister. I think the Tories will start fighting among themselves. I'm not sure what the Scottish will do in their independence referendum. But these are critical relationships in, say, how we as a country operate. And I think it's really worth putting those on the table and having this discussion about them in a place like this.
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree with that. I think you covered, Tommie, in all of the Brussels meetings, the ministers, the heads of state. What is I think the biggest gap in this, but I think your take on it, the relationship with the Republic of Ireland, and to a lesser extent the island of Ireland, because we had very good contacts, and like Ian Paisley would work with us on agriculture and fisheries. He wouldn't work with us on other things, but when it suited his agenda, he did. But officials from the Republic and officials from the UK worked very closely together. They met each other, they were in committees together. That all stopped on the 1st of January last. Now they don't see each other, they don't know each other. And as people retire and people transfer and move on, that entire relationship is broken. What do you think of the consequences of that?
You're so right that one of the things we realised through our European Union involvement was how much in common we had with the British. Like, you had good relationships around the table with British prime ministers. Like, you think Tony Blair and yourself, if there wasn't that trust, that shared commitment at prime minister level, the Good Friday Agreement would not have happened. Like, the stars aligned in that situation. But we sort of grew up, our relationship matured through that European. We found that, God, maybe we've more in common with the British than we thought. They found that, the Irish, it's in our interest. And we also, that kinship of all the people from our country who went to England to get jobs when we couldn't give them employment here, that came to the surface as well. And it was all very, very healthy. And what has happened in the last few years has now challenged that. Now, I think the people-to-people relationships, the similarities we have, there's not a person in this audience, there's not a person watching this who doesn't have somebody in England, who doesn't have an English cousin, who doesn't have somebody who's making a living over there, who doesn't have, huge respect for, some of the values that they see practice, some of the fairness that you see practice in British society. The NHS, for instance, is, it's the best healthcare model in the civilized world, better than the two-tier system we have. So I think because of the things we have in common with the British, because of our closeness, because of necessity, I think we'll find a way of revisiting and redefining and improving that relationship. But it's different, and we're going to have to work at it.
Yeah, you're well qualified Tommie coming from Northwest correspondent, working with Mayo papers, Sligo Champion, and moving on to Brussels, working with all of the funds that dealt with the North, then being worked in the North. You were dealing with Republicans, you were dealing with Loyalists, you were dealing with Unionists. You managed, from where I could see, and the other side of the camera to you, you managed to build huge respect and relationships with so many of them. I could understand Peter Robinson because he was a Spurs fan and you're a Spurs fan, so that was easy enough to work out. But the Paisleys and Arlene and then to the other side to fairly hardline Republicans, which I had to work hard. And I know you have to work with them, and people forget now, younger people would forget what it was like around Sligo, Leitrim and Donegal and Mayo, and when you were a journalist and with the papers first. But it'd be interested your take how you managed to, and I know you did build up great personal, trusted relationships with them all, and how did you play that? Because it wasn't everyone who worked with RTE did that.
If you want to get to the truth of something, well, you have to have a trusting relationship with a person. You have to try and be fair to them, because somebody on your side of the fence, or any person in any walk of life, if you behave in a dishonourable way, you won't get in there a second time. I found among, say, the Unionist community in Northern Ireland, it was quite obvious that I was from the south and my accent, and that I worked with RGE. But I really found them to be extremely welcoming if you had manners with them. And one thing we all had in common, and continue to have in common, is our shared relief, our joy that the killing has stopped. Like, so many people grew up switching on the news and somebody was killed, and it was in response to somebody being killed the day beforehand. And that we nearly buckled as a nation with that ongoing cycle. It just seemed that it was never going to end. And I still think that we're in that phase where the relief that it's over is enough to sort of give us the energy to try and sustain things. I'll tell you something else, that just watching how things have changed, I was so delighted this summer. Loyalists were destabilised, potential for trouble on the streets. And I thought people showed a great maturity in not resorting to violence this summer. I think we shouldn't just take it for granted. I think we should applaud it. I certainly think we should acknowledge it. And I don't really think in our society, or indeed in Northern Ireland, even though Loyalists in particular are wondering, are they going to be sold down the river? I don't think that the capacity is there within the society to sustain the kind of campaigns that we saw in the 70s and 80s.
One question on the North to end this, Tommie, is am I correct that it is your view that there will be this decade a vote, whether it's called a border poll or a referendum or whatever it's called?
I'll watch to see how Sinn Féin get on if they're the largest party in Northern Ireland. I'll watch to see how Unionists respond to that, whether the power sharing structure that you helped to establish, where everybody is involved in mandatory coalition, whether that's reached its sell-by date. And then I'll watch to see how politics evolve down here. I have great confidence in, say, the majority of people. I just think that most people on the island, whether there's a border there or not, I just think they want to get on with each other. I used to love seeing the southern cars come up to Belfast. I used to love seeing, southern people just getting a sense of the beauty of Northern Ireland. And, I had DUP pals this summer who were on holidays in Kerry, on staycations. I had others who were out in Ballyliffin, in Donegal. I don't know how it's going to manifest itself, but I think the political impetus is going to be there for a border poll. Yeah, I think if I was to put a bet on it, I'd say in the next decade there will be a border poll. And I'm not sure how people will vote for it. And I'm not sure how people down south, even if the majority of people in Northern Ireland voted to join it, I'm not sure if the majority of people in the south. I don't trust the ability of opinion polls to capture sentiment this far out.
I think the Scottish executive would show that's a dangerous thing to do. Tommie, I can't talk to you in an interview like this without turning to the personal battle that you've had since 1994. I watched both your programs, one 20 years ago, one very recently, of your battle with cancer. I think probably everybody that I've ever spoke to or seen any of those programs admire the courageous battle. So I think we can take that for a given. But what I find it even harder is I know that what you did, your number of years, you were ill, young family, 37, when it all hit you. Then had to go looking at Form E 112 and then finding Sweden. But what I think maybe isn't known as much is one thing having a battle for the better part of 27 or 28 years, but looking at the kind of treatment that you got, sometimes people might think in watching your last program that the treatment in Sweden was great. It obviously was. But what struck me was the prolonged invasive surgery, the radioactive therapy, the drug treatment, the sustained probing and prodding, and the injections of sandostatin or whatever you call that. The fact that you were walking around almost a danger with radioactive materials when you went near the airport. I mean, to do that for one bout, but you did it for years. I think the people who have suffered or are suffering or dealing with this, I mean, your insight in how, I know, Ciara, I know your kids, were great, but I mean, at the end of the day, it was Tommie had to handle that. And I think that is an extraordinary story of perseverance.
No, it's completely different. In a way, it's a gift, and certainly in a way, I'm as lucky as a black cat. I got the right treatment at the right time. I think awareness of mortality is very, very liberating, because it makes you very conscious of what's important. And you're right, Moya was born in April, and the following January, out of the blue, I was diagnosed. Ciara went back to the well a few years later, and our son came into the world. He's 26, he's 25 now, since July. Moya is 28. So I'm lucky. Health service here have great strides have been made for people like me. And I take an injection every 28 days. This country helps to subsidize that. And like when I see what happens to other people and how early and the bad hand of cards they get, I'm privileged. I got to bounce. These are bonus years. And I'm always very, very conscious of that. It could have been so different And for so many other people, they're just not as fortunate as I am.
Well, you have to be tough. Cairns Road obviously taught you to be resilient in all those years growing up. Tommie, we're getting near the end. I know you long enough and been watching you long enough and talking to you long enough to know that you wouldn't be a person that would go down to Sligo Rovers and hang up your boots. I don't suspect you'll do that. I was wondering what the next phase is. I mentioned your documentaries. I know you like writing too, and I know you like researching. I know you like being top of your story, but you know, it's going to be an interesting decade ahead. You've spelled out tonight some of the things that are going to be exciting. So I'm just wondering, when you turn over after the summer, do you want to give the insight of where you're going to earn the next million?
Well, money isn't important for a start. I have enough. That's it. I turned 65 in April, and the system in RTE is if you're on the staff and you reach 65, you go to make place for somebody else. But contractors, it's different. That's why there are people older than me still working in RTE. If you're anyway fair, you have to say, well, another generation is entitled. I tell you what, I haven't worked out yet. I miss work. I really miss work. I'd love to be going back to work next week. I write 2 long reads at least per month for a website called The Currency, Good People. What I can't get a handle on is, if you sort of switch off, if you go cold turkey, then what would happen to my health? Because I believe that work is a perfect distraction therapy. So I don't feel that I've retired. I don't want to start going on holidays to Krakow or, buying a camper van or stuff like that. So I have energy, and I don't know whether it's going to go into writing. I don't know whether it's going to go working in the voluntary sector. I don't know where it's going to go, but I'm certainly not ready to say it's over.
Well, I think we'll all be glad to hear that, Tommie, because you've been on the airways and writing for now 45 years or so. So it's a fair old go, and I don't think anyone would like to see the end of that. So
could I,
every time I watch, I know you've great people from Belfast now and great northern correspondents and doing a good job. But
Bertie, could I say something just, as you're wrapping up? I'm very conscious that Noel Whelan was one of the people who pushed the establishment of this school here every summer. I knew Sinead, his wife, when she worked up north with the PSNI, bright as a button. I saw their son, Seamus, here today, started first year in Gonzaga. Good luck to him. I just think it's a great tribute to him and to his values that this place, in the middle of COVID or towards the end of COVID, is burning so brightly. He was a great, great man, and it's an honour to be in his district like this.
Definitely. Well, Tommie, thanks very much, and thanks for being here, and good luck whatever you do. I'll be watching the news release to see where you pop up, and I hope it's some exciting role. You deserve that.
Do you know that he's 70 next week, and that he's lost about...
I've decided to go backwards. Thanks a lot, Tommie. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Okay, thank you.